Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the 17th Canadian Science Policy Conference. My name is Antonin Alanda, and I am a Quebec-based PhD student in environmental toxicology. It's my pleasure today to welcome Dr. Jan Ller, team leader for Global Approach, Multilateral Dialogue, and Science Diplomacy at the European Commission. Thank you very much for being here, Dr. Muller. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Well, the pleasure is on my side. It's great to be here at the Canadian Science Policy Conference.
Amazing. Well, I have a first general question for you to start our conversation. From your perspective, what role does science diplomacy currently play in strengthening relations between Canada and the European Commission? And how do you see this collaboration evolving in the future?
Well, generally speaking, science diplomacy becomes more and more important. We see countries discussing science diplomacy around the world, on different continents, in the global north and the global south, everywhere. And that's, of course, a reaction to the geopolitical developments that track to diplomacy, as we call it, becomes more and more important. And I think both the European Union and Canada have a key role to play. There have been a lot of dynamic developments. In Europe, we have been developing the European Framework for Science Diplomacy as a bottom-up process involving the scientists, involving the diplomats. And of course, here also in Canada, we see a lot of developments like the new science diplomacy professorships at universities that are funded by the Fonds de Recherche de Québec. So there are a lot of activities going on. And I think the EU and Canada, they are very close allies, very close friends. Obviously, Canada is associated to Horizon Europe, our research framework program, and we are very valued partners in this. But most importantly, we share values. We share a very similar thinking around how we do science, around issues like academic freedom. And therefore, the more also the United States drops out of the international scene in a way, I think it's important that the focus is on us actually to become very important players and push forward and stand up actually for these values and for academic freedom and scientific freedom.
All right, yeah, absolutely. Let's talk about another subject that is really important worldwide, and that is a lot of concern for a lot of people, that is artificial intelligence. And we know today that AI is transforming science innovation and also including health innovation. So in your view, how can the European Union and Canada best collaborate to ensure that advances in AI serve the public good and foster shared progress rather than leading to competition or fragmentation in research efforts?
First of all, let me say there's nothing wrong with competition. Of course, when we talk about disruptive technologies, everybody, of course, wants to be ahead, and there's competition also between Canada and the European Union, and that's, sure. I think it's very normal and it's very healthy. But of course, we see groundbreaking technologies being rolled out that have a profound impact on our societies, that have a profound impact on international relations. And of course, artificial intelligence is one of them, and it's very high also on the political agenda. So I think, given that we are both rooted in the same values, I think it's very important that together with partners around the world, we shape how the ethics of artificial intelligence. How do we want to use such a technology? Setting also frameworks so that basically we have a level playing field and nobody's kind of fooling or doing tricks with the other, but actually that we have a healthy competition as it should be. But also that we also have a discussion, what do we want to use it for or not use it for? And I think here Canada and the European Union have a lot of ideas and values to share.
All right, yeah. Another important topic also worldwide, and that's also concerning a lot of people, is the environmental protection. And I wanted to talk about that, especially now because we know that currently the COP30 is taking place in Brazil. So I was curious to know how can Canada and the European Union use science diplomacy to strengthen global environmental protection and promote sustainable development, including in the Arctic, and that's interesting.
Yeah, well, the more countries don't talk to each other, and the more this geopolitical fragmentation worsens, the more difficult it will get to come to any sort of international agreement. And that's why it's so important that scientists and diplomats team up. Because scientists, they can always talk to each other, even across the geopolitical divides. But at the end of the day, international agreements, they are negotiated by diplomats, not by scientists. So it's also in the interest of science that we, if we want to have an impact in the real world, that we work together with the diplomats. And there are many issues where we share issues of common concern around climate change, around the ocean and pollution of the oceans, around the Arctic, of course, and the impacts of climate change on the Arctic. And obviously, being an ocean nation and an Arctic nation, Canada has a very strong role to play in this context. So I think if you take a very practical example, I mean, the Kunming-Montreal Biodiversity Framework and the most recent agreement we have on protecting biodiversity in the high seas, in the areas beyond national jurisdiction. It's a very practical example where I think if we strike together, the European Union and Canada, that we can actually make it happen, even despite geopolitical differences that exist in the world. Because at the end of the day, I mean, if you want to tackle climate change, we can't do it without China or without other countries where we have perhaps some issues in certain areas, also in science. But at the end of the day, I mean, we all are sitting in the same boat, and we need to tackle those issues together.
Indeed, yeah, absolutely. How can multilingualism and cultural diversity be leveraged as assets in Canada and European Union science diplomacy?
Well, that's a very interesting question. And perhaps I want to make one observation first. And the lingua franca of science is English, but the lingua franca of diplomacy is French.
It's French.
And which are obviously two languages that are very important in Canada, but also in the European Union. In our case, I mean, we have in the European Union 24 community languages. So there's a lot of linguistic diversity, cultural diversity, etc. involved. So I think it's very important that we pay attention to multilingualism, also in our cooperation in science diplomacy. Just think of the fact that the term science diplomacy in English is composed of two nouns, but the French translation, diplomatie scientifique, is a noun and an adjective. So actually, just by the translation, you get already a different, slightly different connotation into it, which shows actually how important such linguistic issues are. But moreover, I think if you want to engage with citizens, we need to speak their language, whatever language it is, including, of course, all minority languages, because if you really want to engage with citizens in science diplomacy and in international issues, then we need to speak their language, and they need to be able to express their views in their language. Mm-hmm. So I think multilingualism is definitely very, very important in science diplomacy.
Yeah, very interesting analysis. Yeah, thank you. I have a last question to end our conversation. Last but not least, what is your opinion on the value of the Canadian Science Policy Centre and its position in the community as a connection hub, knowledge mobilizer, and talent incubator in the science and innovation policy landscape?
Well, I have to say it's the very first time that I participate to the Canadian Science Policy Conference. I've of course always been aware, and actually I also received some invitations in the past, but for some reason it never played out. So now it's very exciting for me to be here and actually to see all this buzzing in this beehive with people from across Canada, from across science policy, diplomacy, but also of course very many international guests to be here and to be in very insightful and lively discussions. So I think definitely is the go-to place in Canada when it comes to this triangle between science policy and diplomacy, and in providing a platform for exchanging views on what is happening, on the big societal debates, the big issues that are out there, with obviously all the developments we see right now in geopolitics between Canada and its southern partner, but of course also in Europe with Russia, which is and will remain our neighbor. So we'll have to deal with it, and I think it's very important that we have such a platform where these communities can meet and exchange. Science and diplomacy, obviously, they live in different worlds and on different planets, so to speak, speak different languages. So it's very important that we create these spaces where this interaction can happen, and definitely the Canadian Science Policy Conference is one of those places.
All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Muller, to have answered my questions. And thank you for taking part in our CSPC 2025 interview series. That was very interesting. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you very much.